Welcome to Podcrushed. Sorry, I'm still figuring this whole hosting thing out. I am joined by my co-hosts Nava Kavlin and Sophie and Sorry. And we're here to talk about...
Well, I wanted to talk to you guys about a new hobby I have discovered. So, we were in New York, and every time we're together, of course, we have to record TikToks. We have to film some content.
We have to.
And I realized, we have to. It's in your contract, Penn. No, I realized there were a couple where Penn had to direct me. I had to act just a tiny bit. He's like, okay, now you're gonna have to look bored, or you're gonna have to look judgmental. And I couldn't not look worried.
That's true.
My only mode is worried. And then there was another one where he gave me a prompt. He's like, okay, imagine you just took candy from a little child, and my mind just went blank. And I was like, I wanted to practice, but also I was like, I just want to see what that feels like. Like when you're an adult who's not in school, who's not in a drama class, you don't actually do that. So I was like, David, the person who I feel like the least judged by, let's tonight look up some prompts and act for each other.
That's so cute. Wow. Oh my God, I love that.
It was so fun.
That's so adorable. Wait, can you tell us your favorite prompt? Your favorite prompt that David did?
My favorite prompt that David did was, you're a barista and a famous person walks into the cafe and you realize that it's someone you know. He was really, David was actually so good, which was really annoying. I'm happy for him.
Okay, I have to tell you guys a really cute Sophie David story really quickly, which is that I wrote the first script that I ever wrote, a pilot, which is actually how Penn and I came together. It's the genesis of Ninth Mode. I shared it with Sophie and David, and I sent it to them as I wrote this script and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts because you're both funny and cool. We had no podcast together, no idea that we'd ever work together. And I remember that they wrote me really quickly with really great notes. And they were we printed it out and we acted out all the parts. And then they sent me their feedback. And I thought that was so cute. And I still remember that. Yeah, this is great.
Did you guys really do that?
Yeah, I remember the printed out pages. I remember being on our bed and reading through it together.
It's so cute. Yeah.
That means, Sophie, that you have had, I think, about the same number of acting classes as our guest today. And that's going to shock people because we have Susan Sarandon.
Wow.
And that's actually true. She never took any acting classes. But unlike Sophie, she's won, or she's been nominated for 6 Academy Awards.
Like Sophie, she can act.
And she's won at least one of them. But yeah, I don't. What do we need to say about Susan Sarandon? She also has Emmy nominations. She has 9 Golden Globe nominations. She is the star of Thelma and Louise and influenced so many of its iconic moments. She's a star of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Dead Man Walking. Now you can see her in Nonnas, about a man who risks everything to honor his late mother by opening an Italian restaurant with actual nonnas, grandmothers, as the chefs. Susan was so game to dig into her formative years. It was really, really a pleasure and an honor to speak with her today. Don't go anywhere. Please don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss this. Stick around. Welcome to Podcrushed. We're your hosts. I'm Penn.
I'm Nava.
And I'm Sophie. And I think we would have been your middle school besties.
Praying so hard it makes your rosary beads glow. No? Is that not relatable?
Is that not?
Did you not
everyone had that experience?
No?
Hello. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, Susan. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you had some choice. I know press is not a choice, but so thank you so much. It's really an honor to meet you.
You're the first person that's recognized that as someone goes through those same experiences. I understand.
Yeah. So if we can, we would just love to start at 12 for you, given that you have described yourself as falling into acting quite by accident, or at least you have said that. I don't want to hold you to it, but we've heard that. Did you nonetheless see the world?
I try to repeat my stories the same.
Yeah. Did you nonetheless see the world somewhat as an artist at this age, or how did you see the world, do you think?
I have to set the story with I'm the eldest of 9 children.
Right.
In a little tract house in New Jersey with no nanny and parents who one was raised institutionally and the other one's parents died. These two people found their way together and had 9 children and were Catholic.
Yeah.
So at 12, I was in a school, because you don't start how old are you when you go? That's middle school. So high school,
Yeah.
older, right? Yeah. So I was still in St. Francis of Assisi, which was obviously Catholic grade school, populated by maybe 20 families, all of whom had a minimum of 7 children, and some had 16 and 18 children.
Wow.
Wow.
So I was at home. I was not someone who I see my kids, taking off in little gangs and doing sleepovers and all that stuff. That was definitely not. I didn't know that I was missing out on anything. This was just my life to take care of, folding the diapers and taking care of the kids. My mom was fairly overwhelmed. And I played with dolls very late. I was very shy, very in my head. Already with this innate demand for justice, I believe that there was a possibility that they might, come alive at midnight. So I rotated their dresses to make sure not one doll got the best dress look. And I read a lot and I was very quiet. So it didn't really even occur to me. I don't think we went out much as a family. We went camping. Nothing really. I was the Blessed Virgin in 3rd grade in my classroom for the, whatever. And I was really terrified the communists were going to come over and hang us upside down on crosses, because that's what I was told. So I prayed a lot. I had an experience where, I was very religious during the, the boys and the girls were separated, but I would go to church to pray sometimes in the afternoons during our break, and that's when everyone was making out in the confessionals, and I was I was not. I was way behind on any social skills or anything, and I had a pair of rosary beads that I slept with. Who one night I looked down and they were glowing. And that's when I realized I did not want the Blessed Virgin or any other saint to ever visit me. I was terrified until I found out that my Aunt Betty had given me glow in the dark.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a traumatizing experience, but I was not, I was just quiet and questioning and praying. Then I went to public high school. 500 in my class, not my class. Middle class to working people, kids. That's where I met the first Jewish people I ever knew, who were strangely not the least apologetic for killing Christ. And this is where I had, completely gave up the Catholic Lord's Prayer to do the other one, just without even asking. I just didn't want to stand out. So whatever dreams I had of being a martyr and standing for my faith or whatever, no, I just rolled right over with everybody else. And I had never seen, girls that were this tough. People had knives, people had guns, and I was bussed in. And I remember the first time I heard someone say a fucking bag of potato chips, and I was thinking, how can a bag of potato chips be fucking? Could not even. We weren't allowed to say shut up, fart. We weren't allowed to. My mom, who was raised in institutions by nuns, thought that we should have white gloves on in our lower middle class house going to. So that formed a lot of my experience, and it was in when I was a junior, that I was cast in a play, the first play that I ever did. And I thought it was fun. I don't remember really thinking about it too much. It was a kind of stupid play called My Sister Eileen, and I was one of the 2 leads, but and my dad had been a band singer with the big bands. And so he came out of when he came back from the war, he gave up his career because he was now having a lot of children. But he became a, active in the early days of television. And actually, one of the first jobs I had was in a studio that he designed. It was a soap opera on the Upper West Side. But I ended up just with the ambition of getting out of New Jersey and, you know, going somewhere. I was accepted at a college at Emerson in Boston. My parents were overwhelmed with everything else. There were no guidance nobody in my school went to college. So of course they didn't send in the paperwork. They didn't send. I lost my place at school, and the gal who was my drama teacher and as a junior had left the school to get her master's, and she heard that I was no longer going to go to college. And she was getting her master's at Catholic University in DC, which happened to be 4 blocks from where my grandparents lived. So she actually said to the drama department, "Can you let this girl come?
Wow.
Can you give her a job because she has no money, and she can live off campus so you don't have to deal with that." And that's how I got into Catholic U, where I didn't really do anything. I didn't have the right kind of voice that they liked. They were very Shakespearean, which is where I met Chris Sarandon, who was now a grad student. I was 17. He was a graduate student, and he played the lead in every Shakespearean play and introduced me to black and white film and poetry and basically saved my life. And
Wow.
and then after I graduated, he went to the Long Wharf Theater to do a play, and he was seen by someone there. And she said, "Why don't you come in and read for me?" So when he finished the play, he needed someone as a scene partner, and I did a scene with him from The Hostage. And they said, "Why don't you come back too?" Now, I've never had an acting class at this point. Well, I've never had an acting class. He goes away to do stuff in the summer. I still don't really do anything. And we go back to New York, and this woman handled Sylvester Stallone, Perry King, myself, and Chris Sarandon. She sends me up, and the first job I went up on after I'd been in New York for 5 days turned out to be a film called Joe. And they'd been looking for first of all, it was a company that had never done anything but porno. This was their first non-porno film.
Yeah. Starring Susan
They
Sarandon.
asked me to improv. I had no idea what that was, but I somehow did it. And they said, "Wait a minute." And then they came back and they said, "All right, we'd like you to do this." And I called her, and she said, "Just do not sign anything. We don't know what's going on. Just come back." And that film, which was directed by John Albertson. He wasn't even in the directors union at that point. And it was starring, I won't say who it was, but a male actor. I was playing someone my age who was a wealthy young girl who was going with a bad boy. And the guy who was playing the working class guy who meets my father after I've run away was really crazy. And on his wardrobe fitting in Bloomingdale's, he peed on the escalator.
Oh.
So I realized that this was going to be maybe interesting, but probably also problematic. And that's where, so he went, and now I've just blanked on his name, became Joe, and brought Peter Boyle, came from Second City in Chicago, and brought with him a character that was this hard hat guy, this kind of, now MAGA kind of guy, who meets the father in a bar. And right when they were editing, and they go on a rampage trying to find these hippie people that, remember, this is like 1970.
Yeah.
Right.
They are shooting and doing things too. And he inadvertently kills his own daughter, the father. While they were editing the film, there was an incident on Wall Street where all these hard hats beat up a bunch of hippie kids.
Oh.
And so they had the sense to re-edit it around him instead of this, family bullshit kind of thing. And they called it Joe, and it became a huge sleeper. They likened it to Easy Rider, which also was a terrifying dystopian kind of, the year before or something.
Yeah.
And that became a huge hit. And that's how I fell into the business. And then I, got another job with Sophie and I just thought this was hilarious. And I had to pay off my school debt. So I was like, okay. And meanwhile, Chris immediately got in a musical called The Rothschilds. So we'd been in New York a week and both of us were working. And I just thought it was so much fun. And then and I got on a soap opera where I was the girl that everything happened to. So I had to learn to deal with cameras. And then I did a Broadway play. I don't know how, but I did it. And after about 10 years, I thought, I guess this is what I do. This is me, I guess,
Yeah.
And so I just was very lucky. And I think part of my success was due to the fact that I wasn't taking it too seriously. And I kind of was relaxed. And, granted, no one put me up for like The Godfather or anything. I wasn't getting really extraordinary chances at things, but it was enough for me. And I thought, this is really fun, so that's kind of always been my, is this project going to be fun? Are there good people? Is it somewhere I want to be? Maybe I get paid. That would be good too. Maybe it's someone that's not a first-time director that actually knows what they're doing. And so I bounced between those kind of low and independent things, some of which turn out like the Rocky Horror Show to be quite extraordinary, other ones that you'd ever see, and big films like Thelma and Louise or whatever, kind of between the two of them. And that's it.
You just gave us the most concise and interesting summary of somebody's adolescence into their professional era. Probably, yeah, I think the most of any guest. It was so, because there's also so much that you've done. There's also like just an incredible career you have to speak to. I do want to just go to one, but we'll like put a pin in that. We'll come right back. We do just have a classic kind of Podcrushed thing that I do think it's formative for everybody if you're willing to share. First love and or first heartbreak.
I went to my high school reunion and I said, why did nobody ask me out? And they said,
you were praying.
We knew that you weren't going to put out. That's how.
Wow.
I'm talking about amongst the girls with the white lipstick and the sweaters on backwards with the buttons down the back and lots of hair and everything. And I guess I was kind of the class clown in a way, So I didn't really have a crush in high school. I kind of dated toward my senior year, but nobody that stole my heart. Oh, wait a minute. Richie Davis. All right, this is the West Side Story of New Jersey. So Richie Davis was our best athlete at Edison High School. He was the quarterback. He was the best basketball player. He was great at track. He was Black. Now, I never understood that in the North you could still be racist. My idea at that time was that was what happened in the South, but that the North was cool. Except the North was only cool if you didn't step out of line. He was kind of shy, very handsome. Now, I had to verify this when I went to my first reunion, which is the only one I went to. He was not there, but I asked the other guys that had been on the basketball team, all these other guys, if this was just some romantic fantasy I had or if it had actually happened. He started walking me to classes. That went on for just a few days. Clearly there was quite an attraction on my part. And then everybody stepped in and just made sure that did not happen. His friends, the team, everybody was like, whoa, 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 no way. So when I went to my reunion, I said, was that true? Did that happen? And they said, I'm ashamed to say, but yes, that did happen. And I've learned a lot since then. And now I, coach an integrated basketball team or whatever. But yeah, that did happen. So that was the only, but we didn't have cell phones. There was no way of, like, I was on a 40-minute trip on the bus to get back to where my house was, because it was a strange gerrymandering of the boundaries for who went to what school. And I was actually much closer to a different school, but I got on this bus every morning for like 45 minutes to go where most of the kids lived. So I had to go home after school. I didn't have a car, and take the bus again, there was no hanging around. So I didn't really have a boyfriend. And then when I was in college, Chris Sarandon was the first guy I was ever with. And he was so kind and he was so knowledgeable, especially, he's a graduate student. I'm 17. I mean, I just thought he knew everything. And at that time, he actually did. And so that, was someone who I felt safe with. And we were together. I mean, we had to get married because I was in the Catholic university. So and all this time I'm living with my grandparents, God bless them, who had never had anyone live with them before. And my grandfather played opera 24/7. They didn't really understand. But also, by the way, I'm working a number of jobs. So I'm not really around as much as they wanted me to be around. I would try to be there eating Sunday dinner and going to mass, whatever. But by my senior year, I was like, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah.
And in order to live off campus, I had to be married to him. So we decided to get married, but to renew every year to decide if we really wanted to be together. And so we had known each other for 11 years. And after 7 years of marriage, we gracefully split. But he was, really so instrumental to my feelings of safety and also emotional safety and everything. So that was really sad. I felt really guilty when we split, but I felt necessary at the time. It's one of those things we just, how that happens.
Yeah. Meet JLab, headphones as versatile as you. Work out, jam out, tune out, and find the perfect fit with JLab. JLab's diverse collection of headphones has something for everyone and for every moment. Think headphones in a million different colors and styles with features that you actually want for working out, chilling out, and jamming out. When I put my daughter to sleep, I lay with her until she falls asleep, which can sometimes take quite a while. And so one of the things that I always make sure I have with me are my JLab mini earbuds, specifically the JLab Buds Mini True wireless earbuds. They're super lightweight and they have a surprisingly long battery life. Like the first time I used them, I went like several days before I ever had to think about charging them again. It was shocking to me. It's like different from any earbuds I've had before. They have made our bedtime routine with our baby so much smoother because I'm so happy to just lay there with her until she fully falls asleep and is comfortable and I'm listening to a podcast or music or whatever. And we're just both so happy in that scenario. So I never do a bedtime without them, pretty much. Look for the blue box at retailers everywhere or shop jlab.com and use code Podcrushed for 15% off your order today.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Mental health awareness is growing, but there's still progress to be made. 26% of Americans who participated in a recent survey say they have avoided seeking mental health support due to fear of judgment. When people hesitate to get help, it doesn't just affect them, it impacts families, workplaces, and entire communities. So, this Mental Health Awareness Month, let's be that community for each other and encourage everyone to take care of their well-being and break that stigma. The world is better when people are healthy and happy. For me, therapy has been an essential tool in taking better and more focused care of myself so that I can show up and be, a more engaged friend, a more engaged partner, a more engaged father. Maybe, I think even sometimes a more engaged actor. Maybe you be the judge of that. But these changes are, they can be slow, but they can also be fundamental. And so even though they are incremental, they're profoundly rewarding. And some folks, especially men, I think sometimes need help naming their emotions in order to begin the work of regulating them. I happen to be somebody who could name almost always, my emotions, but that didn't mean, and still doesn't always mean, that I can regulate them well or even truly sit with them. With the assistance of a professional therapist, I have learned how to create space for myself to be with some of my most difficult emotions, to accept them, and to recognize where they are affecting the relationships I value, the relationships that make up my life. And over time, it's become a tool I value immensely, and I've been able to use it very effectively. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching people with the right therapist from their diverse network of more than 30,000 licensed therapists with a wide range of specialties. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving over 5 million people worldwide. Plus, BetterHelp allows you to easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. We're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/podcrushed to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/podcrushed.
Susan, you mentioned living with your grandparents, and you're in this new film, Nonnas. You're in this beautiful set that we can see right now. And sort of one of the prevalent themes is like a lovely, warm meal prepared by a Nonna. And I'm curious if you have a meal or a food that you prepare for your kids or that was prepared for you that makes you feel very nostalgic.
Well, my mom, if you're raised in foster care and then live with nuns and an orphanage, you don't learn to cook. So,
Right.
and then you have one child after the next and the next, and you've never even held a baby. She was not making big meals. We were Spam, Campbell's soup, tuna fish casserole made with Campbell's soup, tuna. We were the usual kind of that stuff. But I definitely, I was vegetarian for about 8 years. And when I divorced, I wanted meat. So I went with that. And then for my kids, I was very much I used to walk down to Soho to get clean vegetables, before it was so easy to get organic. My daughter had everything that was organic. And so I definitely learned to cook. Chris Sarandon, his mom, Greek, taught me a few avo lemon nose soup and a few other things that were very comforting. And I think with my family, I love not only having big families, but having tables that have tons of friends. And, I gravitate towards chaos. That's probably just my conditioning. But so I think most of the stuff that I made was in the Italian realm because I really love pasta myself. I'm definitely bread's bitch for sure.
I've never heard that. That's great.
That would make a good T-shirt, actually.
It would.
I was just gonna say,
thinking
we need
that.
merch.
Yeah, you've got to
Bread,
patent
I'm
that.
bread's bitch.
Yeah.
So we made big Thanksgivings. My dad actually would cook more than my mom on the big meals, and then, 15 minutes in there'd be some kind of flare up, and he'd leave the table in a huff. And when we were growing up, and we had the big meal on Christmas or Thanksgiving, they never figured out. We moved to a little bigger house, and there was a dining room, and then the kitchen had a table, and they never figured out to make 2 plates of each thing. So someone would always be walking the turkey over to the other table, bringing the dressing back to the other table. It was a constant give and take between these 2 rooms until my dad blew up and left the meal after he'd been slaving all day. And he would always make, well, we went to church. He was an atheist. And we would come back and he would have a mustache on one of the younger kids and say Cafe Philippe or something, and we would have pancakes all ready, and he would do a whole thing. Or if he was making burgers for a birthday, he would somehow manage to not stamp them, brand them with whoever initials. So he was a rather he could make an event, and those big meals were his. But I think for me, I did a lot of baking. But once I was by myself, or, if I was living by myself, I didn't tend to make huge meals anymore. I guess the self-love thing hadn't kicked in. I wasn't like having a glass of wine in my kitchen for 4 hours, myself a meal. I never got to that phase.
I have to ask you about Stepmom because it's, I think, one of my favorite films. And as a whole family, my nuclear family, that's one we would watch all the time. And I find it so moving. And I just found out, I heard you say that some of the things that you did as a mother in that film came from your own experience as a mom, like the quilt, the famous quilt, which is so...
Yeah, I produced it. So the first thing we did was a big rewrite, and I had to fire the original director because I was like, some of these scenes have to go. Tell me which scenes are absolutely have to stay in as far as you're concerned. And they were every scene I wanted to cut. So I got it. Chris Columbus came in, and I wanted him because I knew that he would be good with kids. And I wanted those kids to feel safe. And I'm still in touch with both of them. The little boy looks exactly the same except stretched out.
Oh,
Sweet.
New York acting now, and I see him regularly. And Jenna I've seen. So we were close, and Ed was really fabulous. But I had a friend whose wife had died, leaving him with 2 small children, and it was a slow death. And so I talked to him about the fears that the kids had. I talked to the kids. Liam's dad had passed when he was quite small. What they would want to hear. I talked to a number of people, and I came up with the idea of the photographs and the things that the cape, and
it's beautiful.
also singing, because I was like, what would she do after finding out that her cancer's back? And came up, well, I had to lose so much weight, so I was always walking in my trailer. And I wanted to lose it before Christmas, so because we were going away to Morocco, and I wanted to be able to eat. So the nice thing about being the producers, you can schedule your death.
Yeah.
So we did it before the Christmas break, so I could eat while we were gone. So, and I was on, and Ain't No Mountain High Enough came on. And I was like, yeah, I wanted something that the kids could act to. And I thought of Midnight Train to Georgia. And then I listened to the lyrics. And I was like, no, that's not good. That's not good.
Yeah.
Perk up a cancer scene. No, that's not going to work. So I chose that. And Chris was totally down. And so, yeah, it was all your fears, because I don't know if you all have kids, but when I had my first child, which was very late, because I never even thought about doing that, having already felt like I did that. Everyone says, oh, life, comes in. But I really found death came in. I had never thought about death. I had never thought about how long I needed to live, or, being safe in a house where you're by yourself. Where are the windows? Where are the doors? What's if there's a fire? And so doing that film and dealing with this question really moved me, and really gave me a chance to learn something and isolate something. And does that answer anything?
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. No, thank you for telling us about it.
So tying something here to, the idea of a Nonna. Actually, there's a beautiful line from the film when one of the characters, one of the Nonnas, I suppose you say, she's estranged from her 4 children. And so she's essentially a Nonna without a family. And she says, I was a strong mother. I raised them to be strong, just like my mother. And then she pauses and says, I would love them differently now. And you already have spoken about your parents, I think, in a way that shows an immense amount of love and admiration and respect. So, but I just thought, what kind of love do you feel that you got from your parents, specifically during adolescence, or what you felt you didn't, and how has your experience with motherhood impacted the way you remember them?
My parents were not really. They didn't have the tool set to deal with kids. They did the best they could. My mom was really smart, really beautiful, and really didn't get a chance to blossom till she was in her 60s. And I think there's a lot of women of that generation without birth control who were very bitter in their lives because they didn't feel their lives were theirs. They didn't make they didn't have the autonomy that we have. I know that all the mistakes that I've made were mine. I didn't feel my life was done to me. And my mom definitely felt her life was done to her and things were taken from her. So she said to me, I never had that much fun with my kids as you do.
Aw.
Because I'm a sloppy mom. I don't care. I mean, I don't care if my house is impeccable. If I have to defrost the refrigerator, I'd rather play with my kids and find some other time to do that. And we were fortunate enough to have a space and to have money. I dragged my kids everywhere when I shot until they could present a really good argument, like when they were teenagers. And then they were so happy to have me go, actually. But before that, I tried to do pretty much all my big films during the summers. And I took them with me to New Orleans for Dead Men. I mean, and I would find a way to educate them there. I would, do an actual syllabus of places things they could learn, whatever. And I picked schools that allowed that to happen, so that they weren't. But then at a certain point, I remember when we did Dead Men Walking, the ducks were hatching in 3rd grade. And we were going to be leaving, and we planned the whole schedule so Eva could be there when the ducks hatched. And then it changed, and she had to come to New Orleans. So then I got ducks, that were hatched. And we had all these ducks in the tub when the lightning hit and the flood came and whatever. And I think now they appreciate it. They didn't complain really that much. But one of the biggest gifts I've given my kids, I think, is flexibility and a bigger eye towards the world of different kinds of people. Their bubble was really big. And in New York, that's a pretty easy thing to achieve, too. Your kids are in schools with different language kids and different kinds of families and everything. But being able to take them to the South, being able to take them to, Australia, whatever, I think that it exposed them to and allowed them to be comfortable with different kinds of people. There wasn't a fear of the other as much as some of the kids that are really sheltered. In a way, I wish I had been even less pushy about education. They all went to college. I wanted them all to go to college. Eva, was doing film with all these kids she took her high school, whatever it is that you get out of school, just because everybody else did it. And then she was going to college. Everybody else was just working. So, she was really a misfit in a lot of ways. And the other kids all went to school too. And I think now that pause to be out of the house and be safe and to possibly be exposed to some interesting thinking people is a real gift if you can do it. But the early part of education, I think, sucks in this country. I think that you don't spend your time finding people's strengths. You're plugging them into a system that's been around. Even the private, supposedly progressive schools are too much of, homework books and shit like that. I wish in a way that they had been even exposed to a more interesting formative year. I mean, as teachers, I think it's pretty much over. If your curiosity is killed by the time you go into high school because you're in a crummy middle school. And middle school, by the way, seems to be the weakest of all the areas, I gotta say.
It is, yeah.
People that have been there for 20 years, these great women and guys, and then you get some of the expert high school, but the middle school, every single one of my kids, I felt that there was a real lack of enthusiastic, interesting teachers in middle school.
Yeah.
And even though they graduated with languages from high school and they, have some sense of history and everything, I would have liked even more hands-on, more interesting, more creative. And not the arts, but just necessarily, but when I say creative, just looking at science and everything in a more creative way. And so I'm glad that I kind of punched holes in that by ripping them from their secure schools and taking them on the road. And And the crews are always so nice. They're always, when we were doing Lorenzo's Oil, we were in St. Louis, and or no, we were in where what's his name? Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it was an amazing Halloween. Everybody got expert makeup on the kids. They were all like little gangs of kids hanging out. And so I'm really grateful for this as my job, because they've seen women doing jobs that you would think are just men's jobs. There's, all kinds of people. So I think it's been a really great thing. Unfortunately, now they're all in the business in one way or another. So I was hoping it would kind of make it less romanticized, but it didn't. At the end of the day, they all ended up doing something connected to acting or film or writing or whatever.
Yeah.
There's this scene in Nonnas where your character takes all of the Nonnas and talks about beauty and says, feeling beautiful is not so much about how you look, but it's about how you feel. It's feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling confident and strong. And I'm curious, I'd love to know either you can answer this about your adolescence or about how you feel now. But I'm curious, given that definition, when you feel the most beautiful.
I saw myself, well, I certainly didn't think I was beautiful growing up. I mean, if you saw pictures of me, I look like an ostrich with these big eyes, like skinny little thing. It's pretty unattractive, actually. And I was in my school uniform, and I wasn't allowed to wear stockings even in high school. So I had a limited, but when I got in college too, I don't think so. When later, I went into the business thinking of myself more as a character actor, because I wasn't the really beautiful lead of the film. A lot of times I was the second woman and usually it was the way I got the part was they couldn't find somebody that could do it, or nobody wanted to do it. And the main parts, the big films that I got were mostly because, for whatever reason, the people that were on the A list turned it down. Bull Durham, I wasn't on the list. I had to fly myself from Italy, where I was living, because no one would read. The people they wanted refused to read. So that was a break for me. Thelma and Louise, I know they offered to do a few other people who, the script was kind of needed some work. And I don't know, they just, thank you very much. But that's how I got that one. So it's never been really my self-image that I was beautiful. Early on in my career, I was asked to do Playboy. And when I looked, and I had no problem with it, except all the gals just always looked so like a piece of meat. I thought, how do they manage to take these pictures and everyone loses their personality? And so I started looking at nude pictures a lot and talking to different photographers. And every year they would approach me about it. And looking at the women that I admired, and some of them were foreign actresses, they were trying to like the Greek, famous Greek actress, Milena McCory, and they weren't perfect women. And I thought, what makes them seem, and Bancroft, they weren't like Anne Margaret, sexy, beautiful. What made them so charismatic? And it was because they all had something that seemed like they were saying yes to life. There was some quality that they were game, but also that they'd been hurt, but okay, they're still saying yes. And they could age that way in Europe. Oh God. The famous French actress, Moreau, Jean Moreau, same thing, met her later in life. What was it about these people that just were so vital and welcomed you in? And I thought, it's just, they're saying yes to life. That's what it is. That's so appealing. And they're not worried about if they're perfect. And they're not worrying about if they, which is easy to come to when you're 22. As you hit 50, 60, I'm almost 80. I'm 79 years old. So,
It's shocking.
You find that the light that you have inside, which was really tested with no makeup playing Sister Helen, that was scary. That it's going to come from, years of loving, really.
Yeah.
Everything, you know. Yeah.
Susan, I hope this isn't shallow, but I think that word vital is just right. Cause when you first came on screen on Nonnas, I actually gasped. I was just like, she looks so incredible.
My
Like,
team.
I
will tell
Googled your
my
age. I was
team.
like, how is this possible? She looks amazing. But I think it's that vitality and that spirit really comes through.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you could go back to 12-year-old Susan, what would you say or do, if anything?
I say hang on.
That's perfect.
Susan, I have to say, you're an incredibly warm and open book, and your career is astounding. Your confidence and humility at the same time is an inspiration. And it was a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
You can watch Nonnas on Netflix now, and you can keep up with Susan Sarandon online at Susan Sarandon. Podcrushed is hosted by Penn Badgley, Nava Kavalin, and Sophie Ansari. Our senior producer is David Ansari, and our editing is done by Clips Agency. Special thanks to the folks at Lemonada. And as always, you can listen to Podcrushed ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership. Okay, that's all. Bye.
I always tell my kids when they're about to go into some family situation that they don't really want to go to for some reason, I say, just think of it as a sitcom. It'll be amusing. Won't be upsetting.
Yes,
Just
that's such
relax.
good advice.
Imagine you're in a sitcom.
That's a great reframe.